My husband secretly had a second family. I found out in the worst way. I always thought my husband, Mark, was a good man. We had been married for 12 years, built a life together, and had two beautiful kids. He was caring, hardworking, and, as far as I knew, honest. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. It all started on a cold Friday evening. Mark had left on another business trip like he did every other month. I never questioned it. He worked in finance, and travel was just part of the job. But that night, my world shattered. I was making dinner for the kids when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Your husband is not who you think he is. Check the address below. My heart pounded as I read the address. It was in a part of town I had never been to. My first instinct was to ignore it. Probably a scam, right? But something gnawed at me, a gut feeling I couldn't shake. So, after putting the kids to bed, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed the address. When I arrived, my stomach twisted. It was a charming little house, warmly lit, with a car that looked suspiciously like Mark's parked in the driveway. I crept closer, feeling my heart race. Then I saw them. Through the window, there was Mark. My Mark, laughing, holding a little boy on his lap. A woman sat beside him, her hand on his. A family. His family. I felt like I was going to be sick. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, snapping a picture as proof that this nightmare was real. I wanted to scream, to storm in and confront him, but my legs were frozen. That's when the worst part happened. The little boy, no older than 5, looked up at Mark and said, "Daddy, will you stay for my birthday tomorrow?" Daddy. The word hit me like a knife to the chest. Mark kissed the boy's forehead and said, "Of course, buddy." I wouldn't miss it for the world. That's when the woman turned to him and smiled. "You promise this time?" she asked softly. "I promise," he said. I choked back a sob. My husband, the man I trusted, the man I had children with, was living a double life. And he had just promised to be there for his other son's birthday. Meanwhile, our own daughter's birthday last month, he had missed it because of a business trip. Rage burned inside me, stronger than the heartbreak. I refused to be quiet. I refused to be played for a fool. I took one last deep breath, squared my shoulders, and rang the doorbell. The moment Mark saw me standing there, his face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Surprise," I said, my voice ice cold. And just like that, his carefully built world came crashing down. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The woman, his other wife, his mistress, glanced between us, her brows knitting in confusion. The little boy clung to Mark's leg, unaware that his innocent words had just detonated a bomb. "Who is she?" the woman finally asked, stepping closer to Mark. I laughed, but it came out hollow, shaking. "Go ahead, Mark. Tell her who I am." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Rachel, I can explain." "Explain?" My voice cracked. I could barely feel my own legs. My pulse roared in my ears, and I was vaguely aware that my hands were shaking. "Explain what, exactly?" "That you have a whole other family? That you've been lying to me? To us? For God knows how long?" The woman's face paled. "Wait, what?" I turned to her. "You didn't know either, did you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't." Mark held up his hands, panic in his eyes. "Please, let me—" "No!" I took a step forward, shoving my phone in his face. The picture I had just taken of him with his other family was still on the screen. "You're a liar, a cheater, and that—" I pointed at the little boy, whose big blue eyes reminded me too much of my own son's. "That is proof that our entire marriage has been a lie." The woman, whose name I still didn't know, staggered backward, gripping the doorframe. "You're his wife?" My chest heaved. "For 12 years. She gasped, her own realization hitting her like a slap. She turned to Mark, fury rising in her eyes. Mark, what the hell is she talking about? But Mark couldn't answer. He just stood there, guilt carved into every feature of his face. How long? I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. He hesitated, and that hesitation alone was an answer. How long? I screamed, not caring if the whole neighborhood heard. Mark squeezed his eyes shut. 6 years. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. 6 years. 6 years of stolen weekends, of missed birthdays, of business trips. The woman, who had been just as deceived as me, let out a broken sob. Oh my God. She clutched her chest. We have been together for 6 years, Mark. I thought... She trailed off, her face crumbling as the horror of it all sank in. We had been living in parallel worlds, loving the same man, believing the same lies. A sick realization hit me. Do you know about me? I asked her, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Number he told me he was divorced. I almost laughed. Of course he did. Mark finally spoke, his voice weak. I never meant to hurt either of you. I snapped my head toward him. Never meant to hurt us? I took a step closer, my rage blinding. You have 2 wives, 2 families, 2 entire lives built on nothing but lies. Do you know what you've done? He reached for me, but I jerked away. Don't touch me. A long silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. The other woman, who was now just as much a victim as I was, turned to me with glossy eyes. Her voice cracked. I didn't know, I swear I didn't know. I nodded stiffly. I believe you. Another beat of silence. And then I made a decision. I don't care what you do, I told Mark coldly. You can stay here. You can try to clean up this mess, but you will be hearing from my lawyer. And don't ever come near me or the kids again. Mark's eyes widened. Rachel. But I was already turning away, walking back toward my car. My legs felt like lead, my heart like a dead weight in my chest. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done with Mark. And he had just lost everything. I never thought I'd be here. Sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers, my hands were steady. My heart? Not so much. That's the last one, my lawyer, Ms. Cartwright, said as she gathered the papers into a neat stack. Once the judge finalizes everything, Mark will have no legal claim to you or the kids. You'll have full custody. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Full custody. No shared weekends, no visitation, nothing. Mark had barely even fought me on it. Not because he was noble, but because he knew he had no ground to stand on. He had 2 children with me, and 1 with her. Her? Sarah? That was her name. The other woman. At first, we had no reason to speak. I hated her by association, but over time, I realized she was just as much a victim as I was. She had been lied to, manipulated. She thought Mark was hers alone, just as I had. One night, about a month after the truth had exploded in our faces, she reached out to me. I was hesitant, but I answered. And then, to my surprise, we talked. For hours. About the lies he told us, the excuses he made, the way he had compartmentalized us like 2 separate TV shows he could flip between. Sarah was done with him too. Apparently, the moment I showed up on her doorstep, everything clicked for her. All the business trips, the vague explanations, the way he never introduced her to his coworkers or let her post about their relationship online. We weren't enemies. We were survivors. 3 weeks ago, Mark called me. He hadn't tried to see the kids, hadn't begged for another chance. He had simply vanished into whatever miserable corner of existence he now occupied. But that night, I guess the weight of his choices finally hit him. Rachel, he said, his voice hoarse. I don't even know where to start. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch, let him sit in it. I lost everything, he finally whispered. I closed my eyes. You threw everything away, Mark. He let out a shaky breath. I know, and I'm sorry. I wake up every day and I don't even recognize my own life. My son, his voice cracked. Sarah won't let me see him. That's between you and her, I said flatly. And you? He asked, desperate. Is there any chance? I laughed bitterly. Mark, I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the illusion of one. The man I thought I married never existed. You were a stranger to me the entire time. He started to say something, but I wasn't done. Do you know what it's like to look back at 12 years and realize they were built on a lie? My voice trembled. To realize that the love you thought was real was actually shared with someone else? I never meant to. Don't, I snapped. Don't say you never meant to hurt me. You chose this over and over again. Every lie you told, every weekend you left us, every moment you spent with her and your other son instead of us. That was a choice. You meant for me never to find out. But you never cared about what would happen if I did. Silence. You're right, he whispered. I don't deserve forgiveness. No, I agreed. You don't. And then I hung up. Now, as I stepped out of my lawyer's office, I inhaled deeply. The divorce was final. My new life had begun. I wasn't naive. I knew there would still be hard days, but I was free. Sarah and I kept in touch, mostly for the sake of our kids, who were half-siblings now, whether we liked it or not. She was rebuilding her life, too. As for Mark, I didn't know. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. Because I was finally done looking back. I was only looking forward. The sun was setting as I sat on the back porch, watching my kids play in the yard. Laughter echoed in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. It had been a long year, a painful year. After the divorce, I went through every stage of grief, denial, anger, sadness. But somewhere along the way, I found something I never expected. Freedom. No more checking the clock, wondering when Mark would come home. No more questioning his stories, feeling the nagging doubt that I had ignored for far too long. I had built a new life, one where I was no longer the woman who got cheated on. I was just Rachel. Mother, friend, businesswoman. Yes, businesswoman. After years of putting my dreams on hold to support Mark, I finally started my own interior design business. I had always loved decorating, turning empty spaces into something beautiful. Now, I did it for clients. And for myself. And then there was him. I glanced toward the grill, where a man stood flipping burgers, his strong arms flexing as he worked. James. We met 6 months ago when I redesigned his law office. He was patient, kind, and most importantly, honest. He knew my story. Hell, the whole town knew my story. But he never treated me like a broken woman. He treated me like someone who deserved happiness. A little voice interrupted my thoughts. Mommy, my daughter Emily ran up to me beaming. Can we have ice cream after dinner? I smiled, brushing her hair back. If you eat all your veggies first. She groaned but grinned, running back to her brother. James walked over, handing me a glass of wine. You okay? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded. More than okay. He sat beside me and I leaned into him, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. I wasn't bitter anymore. I didn't hate Mark. I didn't spend my nights thinking about what I had lost. Because I hadn't lost anything. I had gained everything. Mark sat in a dingy apartment, staring at the stack of overdue bills on the counter. His life had unraveled fast. After the truth came out, his job let him go. Not because of the affair, but because of the lies. His finances crumbled, his reputation was ruined, and worst of all, he was alone. Sarah had moved on too. She let him see their son occasionally, but there was no warmth between them anymore. And Rachel? He had seen her once, walking through town with him. Some guy. Tall, strong, with his arm protectively around her. She was smiling. And that's when it hit him. He hadn't just lost her. He had lost the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he would never get it back. I never thought I'd see Mark again. Not after everything that happened. Not after I rebuilt my life. Not after I found real happiness. But life had a way of throwing surprises my way. It happened on a warm Saturday afternoon. James and I were walking hand in hand through the park with the kids, enjoying the fresh air. Emily and Jake ran ahead, laughing as they chased each other, while James held a picnic basket, smiling at me like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And then I saw him. Mark. He was sitting on a worn-out bench, looking older, exhausted. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair slightly overgrown, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a ghost of the man I used to know. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he stood up and walked toward me. James noticed and instinctively tightened his grip on my hand. "You want me to handle this?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Number, I've got this." Mark stopped a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" James stayed beside me, his presence a silent show of support. I exhaled. "What is there to talk about, Mark?" He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the kids. I just wanted to see them." I crossed my arms. "You had a chance to be in their lives. You threw it away." His face twisted in pain. "I know, and I regret it. Every single day." I studied him. I had spent so long hating this man, resenting him for what he did to me, to our family. But standing here now, I didn't feel hate anymore. I just felt nothing. And that, more than anything, proved that I had moved on. Mark sighed, running a hand over his face. "I lost everything, Rachel. I lost you, Sarah, my kids, my job, my house." He looked down at the ground. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. "That's always how it works, isn't it?" I said softly. He nodded, shame in his eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want to do better. I want to be in their lives. If you'll let me." I glanced at James, who simply waited for my decision, trusting me to make the right one. Then I looked at my kids, running through the grass, happy, loved, safe. They didn't need Mark, but maybe, just maybe, he needed them. I met his eyes. "You don't get to walk back into their lives just because you feel guilty, Mark. If you want to see them, you earn it. You prove to me and to them that you can be a good father. No more disappearing. No more excuses. You show up or you stay gone. Got it?" Hope flickered in his eyes. "I got it." I nodded. "Then we'll see." Mark gave me a small, grateful smile. Then he looked at James, really looking at him for the first time. "You're taking good care of them, aren't you?" James met his gaze, his voice steady. "Always." Mark gave a sad, resigned nod. "Then I guess you're a better man than I ever was." And with that, he walked away. I watched him go, not with sadness, not with regret, just with the quiet certainty that I had finally closed that chapter of my life. James squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I turned to him, smiling. "More than okay." And as I watched my kids laugh in the sunlight, I knew one thing for certain. I had won. I had truly moved on. And nothing, not even Mark's regret, could take that away from me. I didn't expect Mark to keep his word. But to my surprise, he did. At first, it was just small things. An occasional text asking about the kids, a birthday card in the mail. I ignored most of it, unsure if he was truly trying or if this was just another performance. Then, one Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. "Mark, I'd like to see Emily and Jake, just for a few hours, if you'll let me." I stared at the message for a long time. I had already set my boundaries. I had told him he had to earn this. So I made a decision. Me. Meet us at the park at 3 p.m. No promises after that. At 3 p.m. sharp, I arrived at the park with the kids. James had offered to come, but I told him I needed to do this alone. Not because I didn't trust him, but because this was something I needed to see through. Mark was already there, sitting on a bench, hands nervously clasped together. He looked better, cleaner, put together, like a man desperately trying to rebuild himself. Emily and Jake spotted him before I could say anything. "Is that Dad?" Jake asked hesitantly. I crouched down to their level. "Yes, it is," I said carefully. "He asked to see you, but only if you want to." Emily bit her lip, looking at her brother. Jake thought for a moment, then nodded. "I want to talk to him." "Me too," Emily whispered. I stood up. "Okay, I'll be right here." The kids walked over slowly, and I stayed at a safe distance, watching. Mark knelt down to their level. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language spoke volumes. He looked humbled, ashamed, different. Then Jake suddenly hugged him. Emily hesitated, then joined. A lump formed in my throat. I wasn't sure if I had made the right decision, but seeing them together, seeing the cautious hope in my children's eyes, I knew this moment wasn't about me. It was about them. Later that evening, after the visit ended, Mark and I stood near my car while the kids ran ahead. "I appreciate this, Rachel," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying." I nodded. "Keep trying." Mark hesitated, then sighed. "There's something else I need to tell you." I crossed my arms. "What?" He ran a hand through his hair. "It's about Sarah." I stiffened. "What about her?" His face darkened. "She's been digging into everything. She reached out to my old job, even contacted my parents. She's convinced I'm hiding something." I frowned. "Why would she do that? I thought she moved on." Mark shook his head. "She said she did, but lately, I don't know. She's different, she's angry, and I think she blames you." I blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "She thinks if you hadn't shown up that day, everything would have stayed the same, that she wouldn't have lost me." I let out a cold laugh. "She didn't lose you, Mark. You lost yourself." "I know," he admitted. "But I wanted to warn you. I don't know what she's planning, but I don't think she's done with this." A chill ran down my spine. I had finally put the past behind me. But maybe, just maybe, the past wasn't done with me. I should have known Sarah wouldn't let things go. At first, it was small. A friend mentioned seeing her around my neighborhood. Then I got strange phone calls, silent ones, where the caller just breathed into the line before hanging up. Then, one night, I found a note taped to my car. "You took everything from me. Now it's my turn." My blood ran cold. I rushed inside, locked the doors, and called James. "She's watching me," I whispered, gripping the phone. "I'm on my way," he said immediately. "Call the police." I did. But by the time they arrived, she was gone. The next few days were tense. I kept my kids close, triple-checked the locks, and made sure someone was always with me. But I never expected what happened next. It was a quiet Saturday night. James and I had just put the kids to bed. I was sipping tea in the kitchen when I heard something outside. A soft scraping sound. My stomach twisted. James saw the look on my face and immediately went to check. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. I followed, my heart pounding. That's when we saw it. Spray painted across my front door in jagged, angry letters. Liar, thief, homewrecker. And standing in the driveway, breathing hard, her eyes wild with rage. Sarah. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, her face flushed with fury. In her shaking hands, she held something that made my blood freeze. A knife. "You ruined my life," she hissed, pointing it at me. "You took everything from me." James stepped in front of me, his voice calm but firm. "Sarah, put the knife down. This isn't the way." She laughed, an unhinged, hollow sound. "Not the way." Her gaze snapped to me. What was I supposed to do, Rachel? Just sit back and watch as you moved on? As you got the happy ending I was supposed to have? I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Sarah, I didn't take anything from you. Mark did this. He lied to both of us. Her face twisted. Number no, he loved me. He chose me. But then you showed up and everything fell apart. She took a shaky step forward. James subtly shifted his weight, preparing to act. I needed to stop this before it got worse. Sarah, I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. Listen to me. You're hurt, you're angry, but this isn't the answer. Hurting me won't change what happened. It won't bring back the life you lost. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't have a life anymore. But you can, I pleaded. You can walk away right now, before it's too late. For a second, something flickered in her expression. Doubt. Then, put the knife down, now! Police sirens wailed as officers swarmed onto the street, their guns drawn. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. She looked at me, then at the police, then back at the knife in her hands. And then, as if something inside her shattered, she let it clatter to the ground. Within seconds, they had her in handcuffs. As they led her away, she turned back one last time. This isn't over, she whispered. But I knew, deep in my heart, it was. Sarah was charged with harassment and attempted assault. The judge ordered a restraining order, and I never saw her again. Mark? He vanished after that. Maybe he was too ashamed. Maybe he finally realized there was nothing left for him here. And me? I moved on. For real this time. James and I got married a year later in a small, quiet ceremony with the people who truly mattered. My kids grew up in a home full of love, not lies. And as I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sun set over the life I had rebuilt, I smiled. Because I had survived. Because I had won. Because I was finally, truly free.